hours has been with these amazing founders and panels. Thank you to all the hundreds of attendees in the audience for sticking with us and tuning in globally. We have countries represented from US, Canada, Singapore, India, Hong Kong, Germany, Brazil, Japan, China, South Africa, Indonesia, France, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Israel, and even more. So, wish you were all here in person, but it's nice to see you all here virtually. We covered a lot today from finance and fandom. We featured TikTok and talked about all the creator tools they're doing, enabling brands to work directly with creators, creating a dashboard in the system, and even enabling payouts directly through the platform. We talked about leading in the new norm via Chief and LinkedIn, who's covering it all the time. There's such a real need for companies and government to step forward and think through how this pandemic was not equal for all communities. And so thankful and grateful for something like Chief existing for female leaders. We had Hans and Irving together talking about how while LED made it viable, it didn't make it scalable. And Bowery OS with coupled with computer vision, AI, sensor and control technology, robots and automation has made farming 100 times more productive, which is crazy, but incredible to be part of that journey. I really love the food panel where we talked a lot about the convenience economy and actually like when and where we buy food for immediate and future consumption is actually blurring. You know, where you do it, time of day you do it, and how you do it is has really changed in even just the past decade. Making work easy has been really fun because you'll all get a snappy gift surprise. Uh, and StockX, my favorite quote was from Scott as like grow where you were planted. Love that. And lastly, it was such a treat to really have a chance to bring on Function's new CEO, Alex, and interview her as well. Second day into the job. So that's been awesome. I have Hans and Ryan here. Hans, managing partner at GGV, as you all know, and Ryan Darnell, who is managing partner at Max Ventures. Um, have a bunch of questions for you both, and maybe I'll get started with Ryan. So, COVID has spawned so much advancement and innovation across multiple industries, particularly in digital health and fintech. What are you investing in, and what are some trends that you're seeing?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Robin and Hans. I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned, or where we saw the biggest kind of acceleration during COVID in our portfolio is digital health. Digital health, we've been investing in the sector since 2017. We've always had the thesis around like this is 20% of our GDP in the US. It's one of the least adopted industries for when it comes to technology. And really had a thesis around like virtual care solutions that lower the cost of care while also increasing access to care at any time, and also, either maintaining and improving quality. And what COVID did was basically pull kind of where the world was going and where the industry is going forward at least 5 years. And we saw multiple portfolio companies with 10x growth in 2020. And that's an area we're continuing to be excited about. I mean, if you look at that, you've seen a lot of direct-to-consumer patient platforms that have grown tremendously over the last 18 months. Different, whether it's more broad primary care-based platforms or more vertical-specific platforms like musculoskeleton or cardiology direct platforms. I think the biggest thing too that will happen next is you're going to see the back-end tech stack in healthcare be rebuilt and modernized. And one of the hardest things through when it came to actually doing this pre-COVID is you didn't have a lot of early adopters, right? You had to go to health systems, and these were very long lead times, very tough companies to build pre-COVID. And now you have big companies who can be these early adopters, like the K Health, the Rose, companies like that. Like they will use these solutions early, and I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity in that sector where you're basically building infrastructure for healthcare for the next 20 to 30 years. That's another area that I'm extremely excited in within the digital health category.
Hans, how about you across either fintech or digital health?
Yeah, that's today. If I look back, it's been a conference with agenda kind of dominated by food and food related companies, and it's been amazing to see everything from downstream, midstream, and upstream related to that. But if you look out the bigger, broader context, obviously during COVID, we have seen unprecedented adoption of mobile technology. other sectors that are being impacted in a positive way are definitely digital health and also fintech. 10 years ago, the most famous saying is that every company is becoming a software company, and software is eating the world. 10 years hence, now we're seeing that everybody's becoming a fintech company and a fintech offering of sorts. And with the amount of transaction data that companies get, the amount of information that companies have on users, both buyer and sellers, the ability of companies to make smarter lending decision on a risk-adjusted basis to both the buyer and seller, whether it's buy now, pay later on the buyer side, or on the seller side, just smarter financing to finance the working capital. We're seeing unprecedented growth, not only in the US, but also in Latin, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, in India, now even in Africa. Just the pace of growth in the adoption speed, it just is the best we have seen. And on digital health, like Ryan said, and Ryan, who started this community with us 6 years ago, and several of the companies that we have featured today were sourced by Ryan, and it's fun. K-Health is a perfect example of how you're taking AI, taking machine learning, and then taking just a superior user interface to deliver and make more efficient for healthcare providers, deliver superior quality service in a shorter period of time and servicing more customers, more patients at one time than ever. So we're definitely seeing a lot more there happening. Talking to companies that are playing a big role during COVID to make it a lot easier for government and agencies to coordinate the efforts and to be able to test mass amount of people and process mass amount of data in such a short period of time and be able to take advantage of the extra laboratory all around available to do that. We're just seeing at every segment of healthcare being affected by technology. And this is just the beginning. This COVID taught us what is possible. And then the impact is going to be much, much, much greater afterwards.
Completely agree.
I mean, like you said, it has changed all these industries, but it's also changed fundraising. Investors now can meet founders and companies globally, even at their home offices. And both of you had the early vision of doubling down on global investments before this COVID pandemic. So what was your thesis then, and what is it now, or has it shifted since then?
Ryan, go first.
Yeah, sure. So look, I can tell you, we started investing in Europe really in 2017. And the biggest thing you saw, again, I think what COVID did was pull the future forward because this was already happening pre-COVID. And, the biggest thing we saw were in a lot of these European economies and ecosystems, founders were actually thinking very global out the gate, right? In the US, we have 350 million plus people. You don't have to think as global out the gate. If you're in a European country that has, 20 to 50 million people, even less, a country like Sweden with 10 million people, you have to be global from day one. And I think what I saw happening, especially from the New York ecosystem, was you're starting to see like these new European hubs, which were like the Nordic region, London, Berlin, and Paris in the US. They were all starting to be much more connected, right? And founders wanted access, and you're seeing it all over the world. This is just one that I saw up close in Europe. And founders wanted to be connected to other resources in other markets because they wanted to expand quickly and they needed that help. It's one of the biggest things you could do, whether as an investor or as an early executive there. And COVID just accelerated that. And I think another thing you saw, you mentioned Latin America. I mean, Miami is one ecosystem that's become much more prevalent in the last 2 years. It's got a lot of attention, especially the last year. Miami, there's a lot happening there, but one thing that it does is it ties in the whole Latin American community, right? And there's so much overlap with what's going to happen in Miami and what's going to happen in Latin America. And you're just going to see these ecosystems in the US, like New York City in Europe and Miami in Latin America, continue to be more connected. And COVID accelerated that, and I think it's a trend that's just going to continue to accelerate, from this point forward.
Yeah. I love listening to Ryan talk about New York to Europe because it's very similar how we think about U.S. For example, Miami to Latin, and then the West Coast to Asia, Bangalore to Silicon Valley. I mean, these trajectories, these growth and spread are increasingly extremely global. I remember joining GGV in 2013, and mostly it was just on China and in U.S. And as a firm, we evolved. Went back to our roots in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, and then doing a lot more in Latam, in India since. As a Taiwanese American who grew up in LA, and and back then it was coming to Stanford. Silicon Valley was the center of the world in terms of innovation. It still is a center, but worldwide, there's just a lot more centers of excellence and innovations now. And founders are increasingly not just learning from Silicon Valley, but not only from Beijing and Shanghai and Shenzhen, but increasingly learning from each other. We have Latin founders, Southeast Asian founders, and Indian founders within the same category, comparing notes with each other and learning from each other to grow. And this is why having an event like this, special shout out to Liza in particular, as well as Bailey and Jen and others on our platform team, just makes it a lot easier for people to share, get to know one another, and follow up afterwards.
Yeah.
You've both doubled down in New York, and Hans, you spoke of this recently, like just now too. Ryan, can you give an example of one of your portfolio companies that's homegrown and you supported them or incubated them from the start?
Yeah. So, look, I think I don't mean to double, triple down on digital health, but at the end of the day, New York's going to be a great ecosystem for digital health. You think about the early companies that were built here, K Health, Ro, Clover, Oscar. There's a lot of multi-billion-dollar companies that are going to be public companies that are built here, and you're going to see that the leaders of those companies, start the next wave of digital health companies. We were very fortunate to be in the first investors in companies like K Health, Eden Health, Heartbeat Health that were founded here in New York. And we've actually incubated two companies that are founded here in New York as well. One of them in the digital commerce space, and another one that's in the digital health space that's still pre-launch. So it's an ecosystem that I think is going to continue to just the best days are still ahead.
And
go
ahead, Robin.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, Hans, about our portfolio in GGV in New York City.
Sure. That was the question I expected you to ask me too. As as of 2016, after the first 16 years of history of GGV, we only had 3 investments in New York. It's not that people didn't know New York existed. It's just that people were waiting for the right time, for the inflection point to emerge. You almost have to wait until there's enough smartphone penetration, enough mobile internet penetration to affect real world economy, where New York can play a much bigger role. You talk to founders in New York who are in the enterprise space, they can tell you that more and more of the customers are coming from the eastern part of the United States, where most businesses are based. And as more these businesses are adopting technology, it makes sense to build enterprise product in New York to do it and service your customers in the same time zone and do that better. And historically, New York had more engineers that's in the banking industry rather than from Silicon Valley. And increasingly, you see Facebook and Google and Amazon and so forth. Big tech companies have huge presence in New York and tri-state area now. So now you have engineers who are used to building for an internet and the cloud-based kind of structure, active on GitHub and elsewhere. And that's how we can have more and more faster iterations of product being built and customer giving feedback, and more engineers building next generation products. So this is why we're so bullish on New York. And now we have close to 40 investments in New York in the last 4 or 5 years. And if you look at a number of investments we made in the US, New York is like 40%, 50% of that total. So it's just incredible to see what New York can be. And also, and I say that for almost every center of innovation that we're invested in, we're equally bullish on what Bogota and what Mexico City or Sao Paulo, other places will become, and seeing what's going on in Bangalore and New Delhi and Mumbai already. There's a lot of just growth happening in major regions where you have increasing urbanization, industrialization, and more talent now spread over everywhere. Given COVID, you don't have to work in specific cities anymore. You can do this on the cloud, and with Zoom, you can just be a lot more productive. And that's what we're definitely seeing. If I look back at the history of GGV, the first 10 years, we raised $1 billion under management. Second decade is $8 billion. The third decade is going to be the best decade. And that's not just same for GGV, it's for many firms that are evolving as well. And one of the things that I enjoy the most, even in the last 5-6 years, and see how Ryan has built his firm and see how Robin has matured as an investor. And given time, it's just more and more interesting things will come, and I just can't wait for tomorrow.
Well, I appreciate that. And I remember talking to you guys in 2016, and you were basically 2017. You're basically like, look, we want to invest in New York, right? And there were a lot of big firms that said that, right? And it's just amazing how much you've made it a priority, and like the presence you have here. I mean, I'm not saying that because this is your conference. I'm being serious. Like every founder in New York that goes to raise a Series A now, I hear like we got to talk to GGV. They're one of the most prevalent Series A, Series B investors here in New York. So congrats to you guys for doing that.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Without your partnership, we wouldn't be where we are.
Yeah, thank you. And I wish we had a lot more time. There's so many more questions, but but we don't. So thank you both for sharing these insights with us. To end the day in the conference, I want to thank all the entrepreneurs and their blood, sweat, and tears to build these brands and make impact on our economy. All of the attendees in the audience to take time out of your busy schedules to tune in, and all of our amazing sponsors, NASDAQ, JP Morgan, Brand Live. Thank you very much for making this happen. And of course, our GGB family and platform team, Bailey, Liza, and Christine. So please, please, please stay tuned for a series of content that we'll put out after the conference. Take a look in your inbox for a snappy gift and a recap of today's panels and our digital economy index. We look forward to seeing you all in the next Evolving Economy event. Ta-da!
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.